At an altitude of 27,000 feet above Caen, France, Lieutenant Ralph Hermikin's grin could not be hidden behind his oxygen mask. Through the clear canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190A5, the seasoned pilot of Fighter Wing 26 watched clumsy American aircraft struggle to climb toward his formation. It was the first time he had seen these new fighters in combat over occupied Europe. "Our friends have sent us flying milk bottles," he joked to his wingman, laughing at the sight of the large Republic P-47 Thunderbolts struggling upward. Below them 16 P-47C Thunderbolts of the 4th Fighter Group strained to maintain formation. Their 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engines working hard to lift nearly 7 tons of steel and fuel. To German pilots used to the sleek British Spitfires and agile Soviet fighters, these American machines looked almost absurd. Their barrel-shaped fuselages with glass-domed canopies seemed oversized, their wings too small, and their propellers so large they dwarfed anything in the Luftwaffe's arsenal. What Hermikin did not know, and what no German pilot circling the skies like a predator could imagine, was that they were witnessing the arrival of a weapon that would systematically crush the Luftwaffe's fighter force. Within 18 months, those flying milk bottles would transform from targets of ridicule into engines of terror. Their 8 Browning 550 caliber machine guns would soon become the most feared sound in the skies over Germany. The destructive math was already built into those broad wings. Each Thunderbolt carried 3,400 rounds and could fire a combined total of 6,000 bullets per minute. This concentrated firepower could slice a Messerschmitt in half in less than 2 seconds. The change began that April morning when Major Donald Blakesley, commander of the 335th Fighter Squadron, spotted a German formation preparing to attack. A veteran of the Eagle Squadron who had only recently transitioned from the British Spitfire to the American Thunderbolt, Blakesley understood something his men had not yet learned. To survive in a P-47, they had to forget everything they thought they knew about air combat. The Thunderbolt represented a complete shift from the traditional idea of the lightweight, nimble fighter. While German engineers pursued light interceptors optimized for climbing and turning, Republic Aviation had built something entirely different, a giant of the high altitudes that used weight, power and firepower to redefine the rules of aerial warfare. Among the 56 American pilots scattered across the French sky that morning were men who would later become legends, aces whose names would send fear through the hearts of Luftwaffe pilots. But on April 8, 1943, they were novices in an untested machine, facing the most experienced fighter force in the world. The Germans had been fighting since 1939, veterans of campaigns in Poland, France, Britain, and Russia. The Americans were entering their very first day of combat. This is the story of how industrial logic triumphed over tactical brilliance, how quantity and quality merged to form overwhelming power, and how the laughter of German pilots turned to terror when they discovered what 8 synchronized Browning machine guns could do to an aircraft at 400 yards. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was born from the chaos of June 1940. As German aircraft swept across France, Alexander Kartveli, a Georgian-born engineer and the chief designer at Republic Aviation, received an urgent set of requirements from the United States Army Air Corps. They demanded a high-altitude interceptor capable of matching the very best fighters of the German Luftwaffe. Instead, Kartveli designed something far more ambitious, a machine that redefined what a fighter could be. "It will be a dinosaur," Kartveli admitted to his design team, "but it will be a perfectly proportioned dinosaur." When the prototype XP-47B took to the skies for its first flight on May 6, 1941, it shocked everyone who saw it. With an empty weight of 9,900 pounds, or about 4,600 kilograms, it was 65% heavier than its predecessor, the P-43 Lancer. Its massive turbo-supercharger system, with a complex network of ducts running through the rear fuselage, made it look like an aircraft still under construction. Every test pilot who first approached it asked the same question: can this thing really fly? Not only could it fly, but it could soar brilliantly, at high altitudes. Powered by the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp, an 18-cylinder radial engine producing 2,000 horsepower, the P-47 could sustain full power even at 27,000 feet, or about 8,200 meters, where most German fighters gasped for air. The turbo-supercharger, driven by exhaust gases, gave it near-sea-level performance, even in the thin air of the stratosphere, a feat unmatched by conventional superchargers. Major Hubert "Hub" Zemke, commander of the 56th Fighter Group training in Bridgeport, Connecticut, initially despised the aircraft. His unit suffered heavy losses, 18 pilots and 41 aircraft destroyed in training accidents between September 1942 and January 1943. The P-47 claimed more American lives in training than the Luftwaffe did during its first months of combat. It could flip over during landing, spin wildly on takeoff, and dive so aggressively that pilots experienced dangerous compressibility effects, their controls locking up as shockwaves formed along the wings. Yet those who mastered it discovered something extraordinary. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, a farm boy from Oklahoma, who would go on to become one of America's top aces with 27 aerial victories, described his first flight in unforgettable words. It felt like being strapped to the front of a locomotive. The power was unbelievable. You didn't fly it, you aimed it. The first combat encounters in April and May of 1943 confirmed every assumption the Germans had made. The P-47 could not turn with the Focke-Wulf 190, could not climb as swiftly as the Messerschmitt 109, and could not match their nimble maneuverability at medium altitudes. Luftwaffe pilots quickly developed tactics to exploit these weaknesses, attacking from below where the heavy Thunderbolt struggled, and forcing turning fights where agility mattered more than firepower. Lieutenant Josef Pips Priller, commander of Fighter Wing 26, sent his report to headquarters after the first encounters. "The Americans' new fighter is a perfect target for a massacre," he wrote. "It flies like a truck, turns like a cargo ship, and climbs like a pregnant cow. Our men call them Indianer fat targets pretending to be warriors." The numbers seem to support his confidence. In its first month of operations, the American fighter groups lost 14 Thunderbolts, while shooting down only 3 German aircraft. The British Royal Air Force, observing the Americans from their own Spitfire squadrons, quietly suggested that their allies reconsider their choice of aircraft. British pilots joked that the best evasive maneuver in a P-47 was to unfasten your seatbelt and run around inside its spacious cockpit. But something strange was happening in those early clashes, something German intelligence failed to notice. The P-47s that went down had absorbed punishment. No aircraft should have survived for as long as they did. One Thunderbolt returned from a mission on May 4, riddled with 21 cannon holes and over 100 machine gun strikes, damage that would have torn apart a Messerschmitt or Spitfire. Its large radial engine, lacking the vulnerable liquid cooling systems of its European counterparts, could take hits that would instantly cripple other fighters. More importantly, when the Thunderbolt's guns found their mark, the results were devastating. Its 8 Browning Ploning 50 caliber machine guns created a convergence of fire unlike anything German pilots had faced before. Unlike the rifle-caliber weapons of early war fighters or cannons with limited ammunition, the American planes could maintain continuous fire for more than 30 seconds a lifetime in the chaos of air combat. The event that began to shift German perceptions took place on June 26, 1943, over Lille, France. It involved 2nd Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron, and would become legendary on both sides of the conflict. Johnson's group of 48 P-47s was returning from an escort mission when they were ambushed by 16 Focke-Wulf 100ings of 2, JG-26, led by Hauptmann Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, the younger brother of the famous Adolf Galland. The German attack was perfectly executed, diving out of the sun with a tremendous speed advantage. Johnson's Thunderbolt, flying at the rear of the formation, was caught in the crossfire of multiple attackers and suffered catastrophic damage within seconds. 21 20mm cannon shells exploded across his aircraft. The canopy shattered, hydraulic fluid sprayed across the cockpit, the engine cowling was torn away, and flames rose behind the instrument panel. Johnson was wounded in the face and leg by shrapnel, and when he tried to bail out, he discovered the canopy was jammed. One of the 20mm rounds had exploded in the canopy's track, welding it shut. He was trapped inside a dying aircraft at 27,000 feet, nearly 8,200 meters above the ground. What happened next defied every assumption about combat survivability. Though unable to see through an oil-smeared windscreen, with his engine barely running and the controls responding only intermittently, Johnson somehow leveled the aircraft and steered toward England. The Thunderbolt kept flying through damage that would have reduced any other fighter to scattered fragments falling from the sky. Then things got worse. A lone Focke-Wulf 190, flown by an unidentified pilot from Ito or JG-26, spotted the wounded Thunderbolt limping toward the English Channel at barely 170 miles per hour. Historical research has never confirmed the German pilot's name, though several candidates have been suggested based on Luftwaffe combat reports from that day. What followed became one of the most extraordinary encounters in the history of aerial warfare. The German pilot positioned himself behind Johnson's damaged P-47 and opened fire with 4 20mm cannons and 2 13mm machine guns. Unable to maneuver or evade, Johnson pressed himself behind the armor plate and prayed. The Thunderbolt absorbed the entire barrage.
The Germans circled and fired again, this time using only his machine guns. His cannon ammunition was gone. Flying alongside the crippled American aircraft, he stared in disbelief. Johnson could clearly see the man's face, young, blonde, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion, and finally to something close to fear. The German repositioned once more, and emptied the rest of his ammunition into the Thunderbolt. Yet it kept flying. He drew alongside again, shook his head in amazement, raised his hand in a casual salute, and flew away, perhaps out of ammunition, perhaps out of disbelief. Johnson's P-47 finally landed at Manston, with its engine failing as it touched the runway. The ground crew stopped counting bullet holes after reaching 200. One cannon shell had exploded just inches from Johnson's head. Another had detonated against the armor plate behind his seat. The engine had been hit directly. Control cables were partially severed. 3 of the 4 main structural longerons, the backbone of the airframe, had been shot through. Yet the aircraft had brought its pilot home. The survival of Johnson's Thunderbolt sent shockwaves through both the Allied and German air forces. American engineers examined the wreck and realized they had underestimated their own creation. German intelligence, receiving reports from the second group of Jagdgeschwader 26, refused at first to believe it. No aircraft could withstand such punishment. But eyewitness testimony from multiple pilots confirmed the impossible. The Thunderbolt had endured the concentrated firepower of the Luftwaffe's best fighters and survived. By July 1943, American pilots had learned to use the P-47's true strengths. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemke, commander of the 56th Fighter Group, discovered the key through painful trial and error. Don't turn with them. Don't climb with them at low altitude. Use your weight. Use your power. Use your guns. The Thunderbolt's immense weight, once seen as a weakness, had become its greatest weapon. In a dive, nothing could catch it. From 30,000 feet, a P-47 could reach speeds of 550 miles per hour faster than any German fighter could achieve, even in a vertical dive. That speed could then be converted back into altitude during a sharp climb, leaving pursuing aircraft powerless to follow. Captain Walker Bud Mahurin, who would later become one of America's first aces in Europe, developed the tactic that became known as boom and zoom, though the pilots affectionately called it Thunderbolt turkey shoot. Instead of engaging in traditional dogfights, the P-47 formations climbed to about 30,000 feet, higher than the effective range of German fighters. When Luftwaffe aircraft appeared below, the Thunderbolts would roll inverted and dive, reaching such tremendous speeds that defensive fire became useless. At the bottom of those dives, the American heavy machine guns roared to life. Surviving German pilots described the scene as flying into a wall of lead. The concentrated fire created a zone of destruction impossible to escape. Aircraft caught in that pattern did not simply fall, they disintegrated. The true display of American firepower came during the twin raids on Schweinfurt and Regensburg on August 17, 1943, the deepest air assault into Germany up to that point. This mission revealed both the range limitations of the P-47, even with drop tanks, and its terrifying effectiveness when used properly. Major David Schilling, commander of the 62nd Fighter Squadron, encountered a formation of Messerschmitt 110 destroyers, positioning to attack B-17 bombers with heavy cannon and rocket fire. These twin-engine German fighters, built to destroy bombers but far less agile, were the Luftwaffe's main bomber killers. Schilling led 4 Thunderbolts in a diving attack from 28,000 feet. Sergeant Heinrich Roth, a gunner aboard one of the surviving Me-110s, later recalled during a prisoner-of-war interrogation, "The American fighters came down like falling hammers. I opened fire at about 800 meters and hit one. I saw rounds strike the fighter's wing, but the P-47 didn't even wobble. Then he fired. The aircraft in front of us simply exploded. It wasn't shot down, it was erased. The wings separated, the tail broke away, the crew section was torn into fragments. In 2 seconds, the Me-110 was gone. 8 Messerschmitt 110s were destroyed in less than a minute. German pilots had never seen such concentrated firepower before. Each P-47 carried 425 rounds per gun, a total of 3,400 rounds weighing nearly 900 pounds. At its gun convergence point, usually set around 300 yards, the ballistic paths of all 8 guns met in a cone about 6 feet wide. Anything inside that space faced 100 incendiary rounds every second, each traveling at nearly 2,900 feet per second. The ammunition itself demonstrated the scale of American industrial capability. While German fighters carried limited cannon shells, often only 120 to 200 rounds per gun, the American pilots could sustain fire for over half a minute. The standard load combined armor-piercing incendiary, armor-piercing tracer, and ball ammunition arranged in patterns designed to both penetrate and ignite. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabby Gabreski, who later became America's leading ace in Europe with 28 victories, described the effect clearly. "When you hit them with all 8 guns," he said, "they didn't just go down, they blew apart. I once saw a 109 cut in half, the tail going one way, the nose and wings another. The pilot never knew what hit him."
By September 1943, the Luftwaffe had discovered another terrifying truth about the P-47. Its performance improved dramatically with altitude. While German fighters struggled, the turbocharged double Wasp engine maintained full-rated power up to 30,000 feet. German aircraft, relying on 1 or 2-stage mechanical superchargers, lost significant performance above 25,000 feet. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, one of Germany's most successful aces with 206 victories, met that reality in the worst possible way on October 8, leading Jagdgeschwader 1 against B-17 formations at 28,000 feet over Bremen. Philipp found his Focke-Wulf 190A6 sluggish and unresponsive in the thin air. The BMW 801 engine, so powerful at medium altitude, was gasping for oxygen nearly 6 miles above the Earth. When P-47s from the 56th Fighter Group dove on his formation from 32,000 feet, the German fighters became easy targets.
Robert Johnson, now a battle-hardened pilot well on his way to ace status, spotted Phillips' distinctively painted Focke-Wulf from 31,000 feet. His combat report was concise. Opened fire at 300 yards, 30-degree deflection. Observed strikes along entire fuselage. Enemy aircraft exploded. No parachute observed. Phillips' death sent a shock through the German Air Force. If one of their finest, a man who had survived more than 500 combat missions on both the Eastern and Western fronts, could not survive an encounter with the Thunderbolts, what chance did the average pilot have? The German High Command immediately ordered an investigation into the P-47's capabilities. The report sent to Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring in November 1943 was alarming. The Thunderbolt's operational ceiling exceeded 42,000 feet, higher than any German fighter could reach. Its diving speed approached the sound barrier. Its armor included a 3/8-inch steel plate behind the pilot, a half-inch bulletproof glass windshield, and protective steel panels surrounding the engine. Most concerning of all, its robust structure allowed it to absorb damage that would destroy 3 ordinary fighters and still bring its pilots safely home. By January 1944, a new variant of the P-47 began appearing in England, completing the transformation from a laughingstock to a nightmare. The P-47 D-22 was fitted with a Hamilton standard hydraulic propeller featuring 13-foot blades, about 4 meters across, with wide paddle-shaped tips that pushed the air like giant oars. Climb performance improved immediately and dramatically. Earlier Thunderbolts had climbed at just 2,200 feet per minute at sea level, roughly 670 meters, but the new paddle blade versions could reach 3,000 feet per minute, about 910 meters, matching or even surpassing German fighters at most altitudes. The larger propeller also improved acceleration, allowing the P-47 to build energy more quickly during level flight. Lieutenant Heinz Nock of Fighter Wing 11, a veteran with more than 200 combat missions, encountered the new variant in February 1944 during a bomber interception near Hanover. He wrote in his combat diary, "The large American fighters have learned to climb. We intercepted a formation near Hanover, expecting our usual advantage. They turned to attack and climbed with us. When we tried to break away, they followed us up to 9,100 meters. Schmidt was hit and exploded into fragments. Only smoke and debris remained. These were not the machines we laughed at last year." The paddle blade propeller not only improved performance, but also changed the Thunderbolt's voice. The roar of the massive propeller tips, which broke the sound barrier, could be heard for miles. German infantry reported that they could recognize incoming P-47s by sound alone, a deep, menacing rumble that meant death from above. They began calling it Donnerschlag, meaning thunderclap. By March 1944, P-47s equipped with external fuel tanks could escort bombers deep into Germany. The standard configuration carried 2 108-gallon wing tanks or one 75-gallon belly tank, extending its range beyond 1,600 kilometers. With the improved paddle blade propeller maintaining performance even under load, the Thunderbolt could fight effectively as soon as the tanks were dropped. The Luftwaffe responded by concentrating its attacks on the bombers, hoping to inflict enough losses to halt the American daylight offensive. But doing so meant flying through the P-47 escort screen, a mission that had become nearly suicidal. German pilots developed a reluctant, almost fearful respect for the big American fighters. Major Günther Rall, one of Germany's leading aces with 275 victories, mostly on the Eastern Front, survived a fierce engagement with P-47s on March 6, 1944, that left him badly wounded. Years later, he recalled in an interview, "We saw them above us, those fat silhouettes against the sky. Someone joked, 'Here come the flying pigs.' 30 seconds later, no one was laughing. They came down like an avalanche, faster than we could react. The first strike destroyed 3 of our fighters. They vanished, turned into flaming wrecks. Their guns did not fire in short bursts like ours. They unleashed continuous streams of fire. To be caught in that was instant death."
Escort missions revealed another advantage of the P-47: endurance. While German fighters burned fuel quickly at full power settings, the large American radial engines could cruise efficiently at high altitudes. The Thunderbolt could stay with the bombers for hours, rotating in shifts to guard them from above, while still keeping enough fuel to fight and return safely. When more P-51 Mustangs arrived in the spring of 1944 to take over long-range escort duties, P-47 units increasingly focused on ground attack, a role that made them the most feared aircraft in the German arsenal. This transformation began in earnest in April 1944 as the Allies prepared for the invasion of France. The Thunderbolt's heavy machine guns proved just as deadly against ground targets. Standard armor-piercing rounds could penetrate the upper plating of most German vehicles, while the sheer volume of fire could obliterate soft targets in seconds. A 2-second burst delivered 160 half-inch bullets into an area the size of a truck. But it was the addition of bombs and rockets that turned the P-47 into a true multi-role monster. The D-25 variant could carry 2 1,000-pound bombs under its wings, and another 500-pound bomb beneath the fuselage, a payload comparable to that of an early war medium bomber. Later models were equipped with zero-length rocket launchers for 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, each equivalent to a 100 cm artillery shell.
Colonel Hans von Luck, commander of the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment during the Normandy campaign, witnessed the P-47's ground attacks firsthand. They flew so low you could see the pilots' faces, he recalled. The sound was terrifying, the roar of engines, the scream of rockets, then the hammering of their heavy guns. One of our truck columns simply vanished. 20 vehicles became a burning wreck in a single pass. The psychological impact on the troops was devastating. We called them Jabos fighter bombers, but they were more than that. They directed destruction with the precision of snipers. On June 6, 1944, the Luftwaffe discovered that the balance of power had completely changed. More than 500 P-47s provided air cover during the landings, creating an impenetrable shield over the beaches. German fighters that tried to approach the invasion area were destroyed before they could engage. Lieutenant Wolfgang Fischer of Fighter Wing 2, one of only 3 German pilots to reach the beaches that day, reported, "The sky belonged to the Americans. Thunderbolts were layered from sea level up to 9,100 meters. We tried to break through at dawn 12 fighters from our Gruppe. I was the only one who returned. The P-47s were waiting for us at every altitude. You could not climb above them or dive beneath them. Their guns turned our aircraft into showers of aluminum." In the weeks following D-Day, the P-47 systematically dismantled German daytime operations. The numbers were staggering. In June alone, the Thunderbolt groups of the 9th Air Force destroyed 651 locomotives, 3,847 trucks, 512 tanks and armored vehicles, and 4,553 horse-drawn wagons. The German army was forced to move only at night, severely crippling its ability to react to Allied advances. They tried everything to counter the Thunderbolt threat. They reinforced armor on vehicles, deployed more anti-aircraft guns, and developed new camouflage techniques. None of it worked. The combination of speed, armor and firepower made the P-47 almost unstoppable. Even the feared 88mm flak guns struggled to track the fast-moving fighters flying low across the battlefield. While it was devastating Europe, the P-47 was also proving its worth in the Pacific theater. The 348th Fighter Group, operating from New Guinea, discovered that the Thunderbolt's characteristics were perfectly suited for the long distances and harsh conditions of the Pacific War. Colonel Neil Kirby, commander of the 348th, developed tactics specifically for the region. On October 11, 1943, Kirby led 4 P-47s against 40 Japanese aircraft over Wewak, personally shooting down 6 enemy planes in a single mission, earning the Medal of Honor. The Japanese, who were used to facing fast but fragile American fighters, were unprepared for the combination of firepower and toughness that the P-47 brought into combat. Japanese ace Saburo Sakai, who encountered P-47s over New Guinea, later wrote, "We called them monsters. Our 20mm cannons, which could destroy a P-40 with only a few hits, seemed useless. I fired dozens of shells into a Thunderbolt and watched it fly away. Their return fire was terrifying streams of bullets that tore aircraft apart." The P-47N, developed specifically for the Pacific, featured increased fuel capacity with wet wings holding 93 gallons each, extending its range to 2,350 miles. This variant would later escort B-29 bombers all the way to Japan, proving that the short-legged fighter of 1943 had evolved into a true long-range weapon. Perhaps the ultimate proof of the P-47's evolution came during its encounters with Germany's jet fighters. The Messerschmitt Me-260, with a top speed of 540 miles per hour, should have been untouchable for propeller-driven aircraft. Yet Thunderbolt pilots discovered they could catch the jets in 2 situations, during takeoff and landing, when the jets were most vulnerable, and in steep, high-speed dives from altitude. On November 27, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer of the 352nd Fighter Group became one of the first pilots to shoot down an Me-260 with a P-47. Diving from 28,000 feet, Meyer's Thunderbolt reached nearly 500 miles per hour, fast enough to intercept the jet on a level path. The German pilot, confident in his speed advantage, never saw the Thunderbolt diving from above until Meyer's guns opened fire at 400 yards. His combat report read, "Enemy aircraft broke apart. Large pieces, including both engines, separated from the fuselage. The pilot did not escape. The concentrated firepower of 8.50 caliber guns proved far more effective against jets than we had expected."
By early 1945, specialized versions of the P-47M had been deployed to combat German jet fighters and V-1 flying bombs, with a water methanol injection system boosting engine power to 2,800 horsepower and aerodynamics refined for speed. These advanced Thunderbolts could reach 470 miles per hour in level flight at 30,000 feet, fast enough to intercept even jet aircraft under certain conditions. Major George Bostwick, commander of the 63rd Fighter Squadron equipped with the P-47M, shot down 2 Me-262s in March 1945. His tactical report emphasized firepower over speed. "The jets are faster, but they cannot turn, and they cannot take a hit. One solid burst from our guns and they come apart like paper. They must slow down to attack bombers. That is when we strike." The ultimate demonstration of American industrial might came during Operation Bodenplatte,
the Luftwaffe's desperate attempt to destroy Allied air power on January 1, 1945. Nearly 900 German fighters, including many of the Luftwaffe's remaining aces, launched a surprise assault on Allied airfields across Belgium and the Netherlands. At Airfield Y-34 near Metz, home to the P-47s of the 365th Fighter Group, the initial attack succeeded. German fighters destroyed 22 Thunderbolts on the ground, along with several other aircraft. When a captured German pilot was brought to headquarters, he pointed to the burning wrecks and mocked, "What do you think now?" Major George Brooking's reply became legendary across the 9th Air Force. Pointing to the runway, where ground crews were already clearing debris and preparing space for replacements, he said, "By tomorrow we'll have 40 new ones. How long will it take you to replace your pilots?" The German smirk vanished. Within 48 hours, new P-47 D-40s filled the runway. Delivered from storage depots in England, the Luftwaffe lost 171 aircraft and 213 pilots in the Bodenplatte raid, including many instructors and squadron leaders who could never be replaced. These were losses from which it would not recover. The Americans lost a total of 134 aircraft at all attacked airfields, every one replaced within a week. The numbers told the story of inevitable defeat. Republic Aviation produced 15,683 P-47s during the war, more than any other American fighter. At the peak of production, the Farmingdale plant on Long Island completed one Thunderbolt every hour, around the clock. The Evansville factory in Indiana, built on open farmland in 1942, was producing 500 aircraft per month by 1944. Each P-47D required 65,000 individual parts, 8 miles of wiring, 2,000 pounds of aluminum, and 300 pounds of rubber. The engine alone contained 2,400 precision-machined components, each manufactured to tolerances within 1,000th of an inch. Yet American workers, many of them women who had never seen an airplane before Pearl Harbor, assembled these complex machines with precision exceeding peacetime standards. Ammunition production was equally staggering. Each P-47 sortie required 3,400 rounds of .5 caliber ammunition. With hundreds of Thunderbolts flying daily missions, ammunition consumption exceeded 10 million rounds per month by mid-19. The Lake City Arsenal in Missouri, one of several major production plants, manufactured 30 million rounds monthly. Every cartridge was built to a tolerance measured in 10,000ths of an inch, ensuring flawless feeding through synchronized gun systems. Fuel consumption was enormous. Each Thunderbolt burned 100 gallons per hour in normal flight, and up to 300 gallons in combat when using water injection. The 9th Air Force alone consumed over 25 million gallons of aviation fuel per month by late 1944, all shipped across the Atlantic by tanker vessels, each one itself a product of American mass production. Even more impressive than aircraft manufacturing was pilot training. By 1944, the United States was graduating 30,000 advanced pilots per year, more than Germany trained throughout the entire war. Every P-47 pilot completed a minimum of 400 flight hours before entering combat, including 100 hours in advanced fighter training. By contrast, late-war German pilots went into battle with fewer than 100 total hours of flight time. The difference showed in combat. American airmen arrived in Europe already trained in formation flying, instrument navigation, gunnery, and tactics. They had practiced against captured German aircraft, learning both their strengths and weaknesses. They knew their own machines intimately, having studied technical manuals German pilots never saw. Lieutenant Eugene Roberts, who arrived in England in September 1944, illustrated this advantage clearly. "I had 420 hours in my logbook, including 75 in the P-47. I had fired on towed targets, practiced deflection shooting, and reviewed combat film footage. On my first mission, I knew exactly what to do. The German pilot I faced had nowhere near my experience. It wasn't even a fair fight." By March 1945, Oberstleutnant Josef Priller, the same pilot who had mocked the P-47 as pregnant cows 2 years earlier, was interviewed by German propaganda officials for a morale campaign. His statement, considered too demoralizing to publish, revealed how completely German attitudes had changed. "The Thunderbolt is the best fighter bomber ever built. Its firepower is unmatched. The guns never jam, never overheat, and never run out of ammunition in a normal fight. It carries bombs like a medium bomber, fires rockets like artillery, and fights like a pure fighter when needed. But beyond the machine itself, it represents something greater, America's endless production. They lose 10, they build 20. We lose 1, and it is gone forever. Their pilots arrive better trained than our instructors. They have fuel to practice, ammunition to train, and spare parts for everything. We have only courage. And courage without resources is just a delayed defeat. We laughed at them in 1943. We do not laugh anymore. When you hear those guns, you know death has arrived. That sound haunts us. Mechanical, precise, unstoppable. Like everything American, it is about overwhelming material superiority. They did not defeat us with better tactics or braver men. They buried us beneath an avalanche of steel and lead."
By April 1945, the Luftwaffe existed mostly on paper. Fuel shortages had grounded nearly all aircraft,
Experienced pilots were dead or captured. Airfields lay in ruins. But even with planes and fuel, German pilots faced an impossible task. Any attempt to attack meant confronting layers of P-47 formations dominating every altitude, from the ground to 12,000 meters. Feldwebel Klaus Brettschneider, one of the last German pilots trained in 1945, flew a single combat mission before the war ended. His encounter with P-47s over Leipzig lasted just 12 seconds. I saw them diving from above, 4 Thunderbolts in perfect formation. I tried to turn away, but they were too fast. The lead aircraft opened fire from 500 meters. My plane shook as if struck by a hammer. The engine exploded. The wings tore away. I barely escaped with my life. Hanging from my parachute, I watched them wipe out my entire unit. 6 fighters gone in less than a minute. The sky rained burning metal and bodies. The psychological impact was total. German pilots suffered from what military doctors called Jabo fever. Physical symptoms of stress triggered whenever Thunderbolts were reported in the area. Veterans who had once faced Spitfires and Hurricanes without fear grew sick before missions against the P-47. The distinctive thunderous roar of approaching Thunderbolts caused panic among ground troops, who knew survival meant finding cover immediately. The final operational statistics of the P-47 defied imagination. In Europe, it destroyed 3,752 German aircraft in aerial combat and 3,315 on the ground. It annihilated 86,000 railcars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored vehicles, 68,000 trucks, and 60,000 horse-drawn wagons. In the Pacific, it downed 697 Japanese aircraft in air combat, destroyed 150 on the ground, eliminated 1,500 vehicles, 150 locomotives, and countless barges, ships, and installations. The 9th Air Force alone, largely equipped with P-47s, flew 213,873 combat missions, dropped 120,000 tons of bombs, fired 135 million rounds of ammunition, and launched 60,000 rockets. Thunderbolt units achieved an air-to-air kill ratio of 4.6 to 1, while maintaining the lowest loss rate among all Allied fighter bombers. Behind these numbers lay a human cost. The Luftwaffe lost an estimated 28,000 pilots in battles against Western Allied air forces. Many were killed under the concentrated fire of American heavy machine guns. Each loss represented a year of training that Germany could no longer replace. By the end of the war, the average German fighter pilot had fewer than 30 hours of combat experience. The average P-47 pilot had over 200. The outcome had long since been decided not by courage or skill alone, but by endurance, training, and the unstoppable industrial strength that powered the Thunderbolt and the nation behind it. At the Luftwaffe's interrogation center in Oberursel, captured Allied pilots were questioned by German intelligence. The reports collected in 1945 reveal the evolving German assessments of Allied aircraft. The files on the P-47, updated continuously throughout the war, show a complete reversal of opinion. April 1943, a large sluggish fighter, inferior to German aircraft in every performance category except dive speed. Machine gun armament inadequate against cannon-equipped fighters. Assessment, minimal threat. December 1943, exceptional high-altitude performance. Extremely durable airframe, firepower becoming increasingly difficult to counter. Pilots demonstrating improved tactics. Assessment, significant threat above 25,000 feet. June 1944, dominant fighter bomber, superior to all German aircraft above 20,000 feet. Firepower capable of destroying any target. Strong structure makes it extremely hard to shoot down. Assessment, severe threat at all altitudes. March 1945, the best fighter bomber of the war. Perfect balance of firepower, durability, and high performance. Excellent pilot quality. Assessment, survival in direct combat impossible. In 1985, at a reunion of German and American fighter pilots in Phoenix, Arizona, former enemies met again in peace. General Adolf Galland, the wartime commander of the Luftwaffe, was asked about the P-47. His answer, captured on video, reflected the complete transformation in German understanding. "We made a terrible mistake in 1943, Galland said. "We saw this huge heavy fighter and laughed. The Americans don't understand air combat," we said. "They built a bomber and called it a fighter, but it was we who did not understand. The Americans were not trying to build a European fighter. They built an American fighter, designed around production, firepower, and survival. They understood that in a war of attrition, the aircraft that could take punishment and deliver destructive fire would win. And they were right. The first time I flew a captured P-47 after the war, I understood everything. The power was astonishing. It climbed as if it were falling. The cockpit was comfortable, the visibility excellent, the controls precise. It was a pilot's airplane, armored and solid. But what truly impressed me was realizing that the Americans built more than 15,000 of these complex machines while fighting a two-ocean war. Each one required an engine more complicated than anything we produced, yet they built them faster than we built our simpler fighters. That was when I knew we never had a chance. Those guns, we called them Roosevelt's piano for the sound they made. Once you heard that sound, you never forgot it. Many of my friends heard it for the last time. The P-47 did not just defeat the Luftwaffe, it destroyed it. The design of the P-47 perfectly embodied American industrial philosophy, brute engineering backed by limitless resources. Every component was overbuilt, overpowered, and over-engineered. The wing spars could withstand 40,000 pounds of stress, 3 times the aircraft's loaded weight. The engine mount was rated for 12 grams of force. Control cables were doubled along their length, with automatic backup systems. Even the ammunition feed system was a marvel of precision engineering. 8 separate ammunition boxes, each holding 425 rounds, were powered by electric feed drives to prevent jamming under high G-forces. The guns were electrically heated to prevent freezing at altitude. Each gun had its own feed mechanism and could be synchronized individually. The gun convergence could be adjusted between 150 and 400 yards, allowing pilots to tailor their preferred engagement range. Even after the war, some former German veterans claimed that the P-47 had triumphed through sheer numbers rather than quality, insisting that German fighters were technically superior, but overwhelmed by mass production. Yet combat records told a different story. In engagements where numbers were equal, the P-47 consistently held the advantage. Its heavy machine guns, often dismissed as inferior to cannon armament, proved far more effective in real combat. Analysis of gun camera footage revealed why. Cannon shells, while more powerful, required pinpoint accuracy and had limited ammunition, usually only 120 to 200 rounds per gun. The P-47's machine guns, by contrast, created a dense cloud of bullets that ensured hits even with imperfect aim. At typical combat range, a 2-second burst could put at least 20 rounds into a fighter-sized target, more than enough to destroy it. The ammunition itself was superior. American 50-caliber armor-piercing incendiary rounds used delayed fuses that penetrated before igniting. The incendiary compound burned at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 1,600 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt aluminum airframes. German 20mm shells, though heavier, often detonated on impact, inflicting dramatic but sometimes superficial damage. The P-47 Thunderbolt remains the heaviest single-engine piston fighter ever produced in large numbers. Its empty weight of 4,500 kilograms exceeded the total loaded weight of some twin-engine aircraft. Its engine generated more power than entire bomber formations from the previous war. Its guns delivered more firepower than an infantry platoon, yet thousands were built, flown by young men barely out of high school, and maintained in field conditions by mechanics who had trained for only a few weeks. The transformation of German opinion from ridicule to fear took less than 2 years. In that short time, the flying milk bottle had become the most feared aircraft in the history of the Luftwaffe. Veterans who had faced Spitfires, Hurricanes, and Soviet Yaks without hesitation spoke of the P-47 in hushed tones decades after the war. At the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, a restored P-47D stands among other legendary fighters. The placard lists its technical specifications and combat record, but the real story is told in a small display case beside it. Inside are spent .5 caliber shells, and a strip of gun camera film showing a Focke-Wulf 190 disintegrating under fire. Below the screen is a quote from an anonymous German pilot, taken from an interrogation report in 19... "We laughed when we first saw them, those fat, ugly American fighters that couldn't turn, couldn't climb, couldn't fight. We stopped laughing when we realized they didn't need to turn or climb. They only had to point their guns at you, and you ceased to exist. The laughter died with our comrades. The P-47 Thunderbolt entered the war as a joke and ended it as a weapon of destruction. In between, its 8 synchronized Browning machine guns rewrote the laws of aerial warfare and buried the Luftwaffe beneath a storm of lead. German pilots laughed at the awkward American fighter in April 19... By May 1945, there were no German pilots left to laugh. The thunder had spoken, and the sky belonged to America.